For 30 years, there was a nightly ritual in America. At 11:30 p.m., the lights went down, the colorful curtain parted, and a nation went to sleep listening to the voice of one man. Johnny Carson wasn't just a TV host. He was the gatekeeper of Hollywood. To sit on his couch was to make it. To make him laugh was to become a star. But to earn his genuine friendship? That was nearly impossible. From legendary pranksters to intellectual giants, and from chaotic comedians to the dearest friends he ever had. Today, we are opening the archives to break down the definitive list of Johnny Carson's 10 favorite guests of all time. These are the legends who didn't just visit The Tonight Show, they defined it. Number 1, Jimmy Stewart. In an industry built on smoke and mirrors, Jimmy Stewart was the rarest thing of all. He was real. Johnny Carson despised phonies, actors who came on with rehearsed anecdotes and fake smiles. But Stewart was different. He brought a slow, deliberate decency to the stage that disarmed Johnny completely. He wouldn't rush his answers. He would stammer, pause, and search for the truth, paying no attention to the clock. Johnny respected that authenticity so much that he threw out the rule book for him. While other guests were cut off strictly at 7 minutes, producers were ordered to let Jimmy speak for as long as he wanted. Their connection went beyond show business. It was a shared understanding of Midwestern values. But the moment that cemented Stewart as Johnny's sentimental favorite happened on May 20th, 1981. Jimmy didn't come to promote a blockbuster movie. He came with a crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. He told Johnny he wanted to read a poem about his dog, Bo, who had recently passed away. The studio fell completely silent, and what followed became the most emotional moment in the show's 30-year history.
When I think I feel that stare, and I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, and he's not there. Oh, how I wish that wasn't so. I'll always love a dog named Bo.
Johnny Carson wasn't a man who showed emotion easily. He was the cool, detached master of ceremonies. But as Jimmy finished that last line, wiping his eyes, you could see Johnny openly weeping behind the desk. It wasn't just television anymore. It was two men sharing a genuine moment of grief. That segment revealed why Johnny loved him. Stewart wasn't trying to be funny or clever. He was just being human. Their bond remained unbreakable until the very end. In fact, just days before Johnny Carson's final broadcast in 1992, when the whole world was trying to get a hold of him, Johnny made a private phone call to Jimmy Stewart just to hear his friend's voice one last time and say thank you. For Carson, Jimmy wasn't just a guest. He was the gold standard of a gentleman. Number 2, Bob Newhart. If Jimmy Stewart was the heart of the show, Bob Newhart was its brilliant, quiet mind. To understand why he was so special, you have to look at the context of the era. In the 1970s and 80s, comedy was becoming loud, manic, and desperate for attention. But then there was Bob. He walked onto the stage looking less like a comedy superstar and more like a nervous accountant who had accidentally wandered into the studio looking for a restroom. Johnny absolutely adored that contrast. While other guests fought desperately for every second of airtime, Bob mastered the art of the micro-pause. He would stare blankly, stammer, and let the silence hang in the air until the audience couldn't take it anymore.
A German would say, why would you call this man curly? He has no hair at all. Why would you call someone curly who has no hair? That doesn't make sense.
It's not funny then.
And Tiny is at least 350 pounds.
Johnny Carson was, at his core, an intellectual who admired the mechanics of a joke. He loved Bob because Bob's comedy required the audience to think. When Newhart did his famous telephone routines, talking to absolutely no one, Johnny would sit back with a look of pure delight. He wasn't just laughing, he was studying a master at work. Sadly, we lost the legendary Bob Newhart in July of 2024 at the age of 94. But looking back at these tapes, you realize something profound. He proved that you didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the funniest. You just needed to be the smartest. Johnny knew that better than anyone, treating Bob not just as a guest, but as a comedic equal. Number 3, Don Rickles. If Bob Newhart was the polite eye of the storm, Don Rickles was the hurricane itself. Known as the Merchant of Venom, Rickles was the only man in Hollywood who could walk onto the set, insult the host, mock the audience, and break the set furniture, all while receiving a standing ovation. You have to remember that Johnny Carson was treated like royalty by everyone else. People were terrified of him. They walked on eggshells. But Don Rickles? He didn't care about the hierarchy. To him, Johnny wasn't the king of late night. He was just another guy to roast. He attacked Johnny's clothes, his expensive divorces, and his golf game with absolutely no mercy. And the more brutal the insults got, the harder Johnny laughed.
What the hell happened to this? You know how long I've had this cigarette box on this desk?
You brought that up from New York City?
I brought this from New York. What on earth?
It happened last night.
Who?
Don Rickles.
I did not see the
Don
show
Rickles
last
did it last night. He's taping across the hall.
Somebody broke my cigarette box. I just started the show. I picked my box up off my desk that I've had for 9 years. My box is broken. They told me you broke it on the show last night.
Well, I really...
You big dummy!
No, but I'm sorry about the box.
Well, so am
I will come up with something.
Well, I hope so.
There is a famous psychology to their friendship. Johnny often said that Don was the only person who made him feel like a civilian again. When Rickles was in the chair, Carson didn't have to carry the show. He just had to sit back and try to survive the assault. It wasn't just about being mean, though. Underneath the shouting and the insults, there was a deep, genuine love between them. Rickles was the court jester who was allowed to slap the king. He brought a dangerous, unpredictable energy that kept Johnny sharp. You tuned in because you truly didn't know what Don was going to say next, and looking at Johnny's face, you could tell he didn't know either. In a scripted world, Rickles was pure, unfiltered chaos, and Johnny was his biggest fan. Number 4, Burt Reynolds. To understand why Burt Reynolds was such a massive get for the show, you have to remember his status in the 1970s. He wasn't just an actor, he was the #1 box office star in the world, the definition of Hollywood cool. But unlike other A-listers who carefully protected their image, Burt came to The Tonight Show to destroy his. He treated the studio like a fraternity house, bringing a sense of genuine danger and spontaneity that Johnny absolutely craved. The most legendary example of this dynamic, and perhaps the most famous visual in the show's history, was the whipped cream fight. It started innocently enough during a segment with Dom DeLuise, but in a split second, Reynolds escalated it by smashing a handful of shaving cream directly into Johnny Carson's face. No warning, no setup. For a moment, time stood still. Johnny's jaw dropped, and the audience gasped. But then, Johnny wiped his eyes and laughed. He loved it because it shattered the rules. After interviewing serious politicians or nervous authors, Burt was a vacation from professionalism. He allowed Johnny to stop being the boss and just be one of the guys, rolling around on the floor in a ruined tuxedo, proving that underneath the heavy crown of the king of late night, Johnny was still just a kid who wanted to play. Number 5, Rodney Dangerfield. In the high-stakes world of television, Rodney Dangerfield was Johnny's ultimate insurance policy. Johnny famously called him the only man who can save a dying show. If the monologue bombed or the first guest was boring, producers knew exactly what to do. Send in Rodney. From the second he walked through the curtain, sweating, twitching, and tugging at his tie, the energy in the room would skyrocket. He didn't need a warm-up. He was a machine gun of comedy.
I got a big appetite, big appetite. Are you kidding?
Like to eat, huh?
Well, when I eat at McDonald's, I stand outside and watch the sign change. I mean, you're a big appetite. I mean, you gotta exercise. I don't exercise.
You gotta
I'm
keep
too
it
old
fit.
to exercise.
Oh, come on now.
Kid, if you see me jogging, it means the laxative is working.
Carson admired Rodney because he was a technician of comedy. While other guests rambled, Rodney stripped humor down to its rawest form. Setup, punchline, laugh, wasting zero time. But what made their relationship special was how Johnny played the role of the protector. He knew Rodney was genuinely insecure and neurotic backstage, always worried he wasn't funny enough. So, on stage, Johnny became his biggest cheerleader. You would often see Carson leaning in, laughing harder than necessary, or feeding him perfect setup lines just to keep Rodney's momentum going. It was a partnership. Rodney provided the chaos, and Johnny provided the stability. Carson respected that Rodney never phoned it in. He worked harder for a laugh than anyone else in the business, and for 30 years, he never let Johnny down. Number 6. Carol Burnett. If Johnny Carson was the undisputed king of late night, Carol Burnett was the queen of comedy, and whenever she stepped onto that stage, it was a meeting of royalty. You have to realize that in the 1970s, the landscape of television comedy was overwhelmingly male. But Carol didn't just survive in that world, she dominated it. Johnny admired her because she possessed the exact same skill set he did. She could handle a monologue, she was a master of sketch comedy, and she could improvise with the audience better than anyone else in the business. When Carol sat in the chair, the dynamic shifted. Johnny wasn't interviewing a subordinate, he was talking to a peer. They shared a language of raised eyebrows and subtle glances that the audience ate up. There was no need for forced energy or fake laughter. Whether she was doing her famous Tarzan yell or simply recounting a disaster from her own variety show, Johnny looked at her with a mixture of professional awe and genuine affection. He often noted that Carol had a unique warmth that could melt the camera lens. While comedians like Rickles brought tension, Carol brought comfort. She made Johnny feel safe. He knew that no matter what happened during the interview, whether a prop failed or a joke bombed, Carol could save the moment with a single facial expression. In a high-pressure job where Johnny constantly had to carry the weight of the show, Carol Burnett was one of the few guests who allowed him to put that weight down and just enjoy the company of a true equal. Number 7. James Garner. If you ask Johnny Carson who he would want to be stuck on a desert island with, there is a good chance he would say James Garner. In a town full of fragile egos and high-maintenance personalities, Garner was a breath of fresh air. He was the ultimate man's man, rugged, handsome, and incredibly talented, yet completely unimpressed with himself. Johnny loved him because James didn't treat the interview like a performance. He treated it like a conversation on a back porch. They were actually close friends off camera, often sharing private jokes and a mutual disdain for the pretentiousness of Hollywood. When Garner sat down, you could visibly see Johnny's shoulders drop. The tension vanished. He knew he didn't have to carry the segment or worry about dead air. James had a dry, understated wit that matched Johnny's perfectly. They could spend 10 minutes talking about absolutely nothing, maybe just a bad day of golf or a mundane annoyance, and make it captivating. Garner represented the kind of easy, effortless charisma that Johnny admired most. He didn't need to shout to get attention. He just leaned back, smiled, and charmed the entire nation without even trying. While comedians like Rickles brought the heat, Garner brought the shade, a relaxed, confident vibe that made the studio feel like a living room. For the audience, watching them was like eavesdropping on two best friends. And for Johnny, James Garner was the constant reminder that you could be a massive star and still remain a decent, down-to-earth human being. Number 8. George Burns. If you want to talk about longevity, George Burns didn't just have a career, he had about 4 different lifetimes in show business. By the time he became a regular on The Tonight Show, he was already an elderly statesman of comedy, a man who had been making people laugh since before Johnny Carson was even born. Johnny treated George with a level of reverence that was reserved for almost no one else. When Burns walked out, usually trailing a cloud of cigar smoke, Johnny didn't just see a guest, he saw the history of American entertainment sitting in a chair. George was the bridge between the old vaudeville stages of the 1920s and the modern television era, and he navigated both with effortless cool. What Johnny loved most was George's economy of words. He never rushed. He would take a long drag of his cigar, look at the audience with those famous round glasses, and deliver a line that would bring the house down. It was a masterclass in timing. Even in his 90s, George played the character of the unlikely ladies' man, making jokes about his dating life that shocked and delighted Johnny. There was also a sense of aspiration. Johnny looked at George Burns and saw the future he wanted for himself, to be sharp, funny, and relevant well into old age. Burns proved that comedy didn't have an expiration date. He was the only guest who could sit there, smoke a cigar, and effectively hold court while the king of late night sat back and listened like an eager student. Number 9. Lucille Ball. When Lucille Ball walked onto the set, the atmosphere shifted. You have to remember that Johnny Carson was a student of television history, and he knew exactly who he was sitting across from. Lucy wasn't just a guest. She was the architect of the medium. She had invented the way sitcoms were filmed and had run her own studio at a time when women weren't even allowed in most boardrooms. Johnny's affection for Lucy was rooted in profound respect. While he was often the king of his own domain, with Lucy, he was happy to be the supporting actor. He admired her perfectionism. He knew that every look, every stumble, and every comedic beat Lucy delivered was the result of years of disciplined craft. They shared a bond over the business of being funny, the late nights, the rehearsals, and the pressure of staying on top. On camera, their chemistry was a mix of high-energy comedy and deep sincerity. Johnny loved to hear her stories about the early days of I Love Lucy, and he would often defend her against anyone who suggested she was anything less than a genius. Even as the years passed and the industry changed, Johnny ensured that whenever Lucy visited, she was treated with the dignity of a head of state. For him, she wasn't just a star. She was the foundation upon which his own career was built. Seeing them together was a reminder of a time when television was driven by pure, unadulterated talent and a relentless work ethic. Number 10. Orson Welles. While many guests came to The Tonight Show to perform, Orson Welles came to dominate the conversation. Johnny Carson was famously private and highly intelligent, and he often felt that late-night television could be a bit superficial. But when Orson Welles sat down, the IQ in the room seemed to double. Johnny didn't just admire Orson, he was fascinated by him. Here was the man who had written, directed, and starred in Citizen Kane, the greatest film ever made, sitting on his couch, sharing stories about magic, politics, and the philosophy of art. Their dynamic was unlike any other on the show. Johnny would lean forward, chin in hand, completely mesmerized by Welles's booming, thunderous voice and his masterful storytelling. Orson didn't need jokes to keep the audience's attention. He used his massive intellect and his legendary presence. Johnny once told his close friends that his conversations with Orson were some of the most intellectually satisfying moments of his entire career. Welles challenged Johnny. He reminded him that television could be more than just movie plugs and quick laughs. It could be a place for deep, meaningful exchange. For Johnny, having Orson as a regular guest was a badge of honor. It proved that The Tonight Show wasn't just a variety hour. It was a stage where the most brilliant minds in history felt at home. Orson Welles was the final piece of the puzzle, the guest who provided the intellectual weight that Johnny so deeply craved. These 10 legends shared something crucial. They made Johnny Carson feel like a real person instead of just a television institution. They brought out different, authentic sides of him. Stewart made him vulnerable. Newhart made him feel understood. Reynolds made him playful, and Rickles made him laugh like a civilian. Rodney made him supportive, while Carol and Garner made him feel comfortable and safe. Burns taught him humility. Lucy earned his deepest respect, and Welles kept him intellectually engaged. That was the real test for Johnny. Could you break through the professional exterior and find the man underneath? These were the 10 who succeeded every single time. If you enjoyed this journey through the best moments of The Tonight Show, don't let the nostalgia end here. Hit the like button if these legends brought a smile to your face, and subscribe to our channel. We believe these stories deserve to be remembered, and your support helps us keep the history of the Golden Age alive. See you in the next video.